Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Theresa May has spent the day meeting senior ministers in Downing Street as she battles to get support for her Brexit plans after yesterday's EU summit. The UK was originally meant to leave the EU in a week's time, on March the 29th. But after two failed attempts by Theresa May to get her withdrawal agreement through the Commons, the EU last night agreed to an extension. It means if she gets her deal through Parliament next week, Brexit will happen on the 22nd of May to give MPs time to pass the necessary legislation. But if the deal fails again, the UK has to propose another way forward to the EU by the 12th of April. If there are no new proposals, we could leave without a deal. Labour's Jeremy Corbyn said that MPs should be given a series of alternative options next week to vote on. Our political editor Laura Kunsberg reports.
How long now? How much longer before we leave? How much longer for this Prime Minister? How much longer can our politics really go on like this? Just after midnight in Brussels, Theresa May confirmed the EU granted not as long a delay as she'd asked for, but a pause.
Good morning.
An extra fortnight to give her another chance to pass her deal.
The date of our departure will now be extended to the 22nd of May. If Parliament does not agree a deal next week, the EU Council will extend Article 50 until the 12th of April. At this point, we would either leave with no deal or put forward an alternative plan.
So we'll leave a little late if MPs back down and back her. But why would they do that when she strongly pointed the finger at them?
Doesn't this delay just postpone the dilemma you still find yourself in? What is it that makes you think you have a chance of passing your vote next week? And do you think actually you should apologise for the remarks you made about what Parliament has done?
There are passionately held views on all sides of this argument. And yes, as I said last night, I expressed frustration, but I know MPs are frustrated too. Getting the deal through next week in a meaningful vote means that we can have that extension to the 22nd of May, get our legislation through, deliver on the referendum.
Theresa May missed out on this last photo call in Brussels with its booming music and cheesy grins. But no one here really believes she'll get her deal through back in Westminster. Odds on, it will then be for MPs to determine a different deal or a longer delay.
The fate of Brexit is in the hands of our British friends. We are, as the EU, we are prepared for the worst, but hope for the best. As you know, hope dies last.
How much hope, though, does Number 10's weary team really have? If the deal fails, they've already promised that MPs can have different votes on different versions of Brexit. What isn't clear, though, is whether those votes would force ministers' hand and change the plan, or just give a sense of direction.
The government would provide Parliament with the means to come to a view on the options available.
Some ministers think the government should lead that process and be bound by whatever gets most support in the Commons. The problem is, others, and many backbenchers, are horrified by the idea. With no majority, though, Theresa May's choice might be to budge or be budged.
Hello, have a nice weekend.
Are you supporting these negative votes, Mr Gove?
Parliament now has to take control of the process. The government has failed. The Prime Minister has failed. Her deal has gone.
Neither Labour nor even some of the Prime Minister's allies are coming to her aid.
She's got to listen and consult with Parliament. She cannot go on living in a bunker and pretending it's all going to come all right next week. It won't unless there's a change by her.
The government has not taken a grip of the situation. It has been prepared to be pushed around at every level. I think cabinet divisions have caused real problems for the Prime Minister.
Westminster is already sparring over the next round. How to move forward if and when the government loses its deal. Another fight breaking out before the current battle's even over.
And Laura is in Westminster for us now. Laura, where does all this leave the Prime Minister tonight?
Well, Rita, I think it leaves the Prime Minister and Number 10 in a pretty bad place. There's no two ways about it. And Conservatives on all sides of the Brexit debate are really alarmed at how things seem to be unravelling. You know, for a long time, Theresa May has been saved all the time, if you like, by the fact that there's been no coalescing around an alternative to her idea, and truthfully also no coalescing around anybody else who might be better equipped to do the job that could get the kind of support from the two different sides of the Conservative Party. But with all the pressure on her now and all the things that seem to keep going wrong, all the misjudgments that seem to be taking place, some people who until now have been studiously loyal to her are really starting to tear their hair out. One senior MP, very influential in the party, who's been trying hard to help behind the scenes, is now incandescent, just to give you one example, who said to me very frustratedly, she's angered all the people whose support she needs. She's so stubborn and she's just not suited to the job. Now, things are very febrile, they're very, very fluid. I'm not standing here saying tonight she's suddenly on her way out, but there is a sense that things are moving pretty quickly in the wrong direction for Number 10, and there are some big decisions that the government's going to have to try to make to get out of this hole.
Laura, thank you. Laura Kunsberg there.
Brexit will be delayed by a fortnight and perhaps longer after European leaders agreed last night that they didn't want Britain to face a cliff edge in a week's time. They told Theresa May that if MPs back her deal next week, the UK would leave on the 22nd of May. If she fails to get the Commons' backing, she would have until 12th of April to decide on what to do next. That could mean a no-deal Brexit on that day. Any longer extension would require MPs and the government to agree a new compromise deal with the EU and commit to holding European parliamentary elections. Our political editor, Gary Gibbon, has a story.
Last night's meeting on Brexit and how long a delay to let Britain have dragged on and got quite fractious, pushing back the rest of the EU agenda into this morning.
Chers amis, nous n'avons pas seulement parlé du Royaume-Uni.
My dear friends, we didn't just talk about the United Kingdom, we talked about China as well. And it was much more easy to talk about China than it was to talk about the United Kingdom, I have to say.
There are definitely some countries, particularly those that aren't near to the UK, who are kind of sick of this and, you know, are sort of saying that they can no longer explain to the public why so much time is being spent on Brexit.
Tellingly, President Macron said the delay was shaped to reduce the chances of the EU copping the blame for a no-deal Brexit, which is looking much more likely to people here.
Que vouloir faire un sommet de crise la semaine prochaine.
Trying to organise a crisis summit next week was a bad idea, because it would be the 27 who would have taken on the responsibility in case there is a no in British Parliament a few days before the deadline of 29th of March and say, oh, there's no deal. So the blame game would be against the 27th.
The EU gave Theresa May a few days to test her deal again, and then 2 weeks to see what Parliament wants.
It means that until the 12th of April, anything is possible. A deal, a long extension, if the UK decided to rethink its strategy, or revoking Article 50, which is a prerogative of the UK government.
Some of those are options Theresa May said she couldn't countenance, even though at a press conference late last night she promised to seek the views of the Commons.
I was very clear that we need to work with the House to decide how to proceed if we don't get the deal through this week.
We don't know what Parliament will take as its view. We're seeking to crystallise a majority in favour of some propositions, so we have a way forward. Thank you.
Theresa May's deputy, David Livingstone, didn't waste any time calling in MPs and leaders of smaller parties to discuss how the Commons might conduct votes on other approaches.
Well, I think the whole assumption behind the exercise that David Livingstone is leading is that Parliament will be taking back control, and the question is how we do it in a sensible, orderly way. Thank you. Thank you.
Some pro-Brexit Tories were appalled and threatened to topple Theresa May the moment she goes near any of the options opposition party leaders want to discuss.
You think she might implement what they instruct her to if they have a clear instruction?
Well, part of the problem with that is that if it's either a weakened deal or indeed that it's no deal whatsoever, that it's an extension of Article 50, so we fight the European Union elections, the Prime Minister will be packing her bags. Her days are absolutely numbered in days.
The pro-Brexit march to leave reached Nottinghamshire today, not to everyone's delight.
But I shall be there in London with a million other people, some of whom have changed their minds in the face of the facts.
You think they've changed their mind?
Some of them have.
You think they've changed their mind?
Some estimates suggest 1 million pro-second referendum supporters might join her on the march in London tomorrow. An online petition to get a debate revoking Article 50 reached 3.5 million this evening, though the data suggests the hotspots of pro-Remain support are pretty much the same as they were in the referendum.
If it has more than 100,000 supporters, I believe this petition has to be debated in the British Parliament. So I assume it's going to play a role in the British Parliament, but that is a decision for the British side.
Some EU leaders are becoming experts in the minutiae of the Brexit saga, but patience is wearing thin. The once unthinkable no-deal Brexit is looking to some leaders leaving Brussels today like a very real possibility.
Gary Gibbon with that report. Well, I'm joined now by Nadeem Zahawi, the Children's Minister. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Zahawi. So I've just come back from Brussels on the Eurostar, and the overwhelming impression I got in Brussels from just about everyone I spoke to is that Theresa May is finished. She has no credibility with fellow EU leaders. They do not believe that she can get the deal passed. And in fact, the more she talked about the deal, the less convincing she became. What's your reaction to that?
Well, first of all, I haven't heard a single EU leader actually say that Theresa May is finished. In fact, Donald Tusk and others have all said that what the Prime Minister presented and what they have now come back with is the options that are facing Parliament next week. And I think the Prime Minister has done one thing, which is sharpen the point of decision. Because if we don't pass the withdrawal agreement next week, then clearly Parliament will have to decide as to whether we have a much softer Brexit or ultimately no Brexit at all, which I think, as someone who campaigned to deliver on Brexit and to want to keep my promise to the British people, I would much rather all of us come together and actually vote for the withdrawal agreement, and we can leave on the 22nd of May, as is now the new date, effectively. OK,
but the EU issued an ultimatum, I think, on Wednesday, because they wanted to pressurise MPs to vote for the deal. Then when they heard Theresa May give a speech attacking the very MPs she needed to get the deal passed, they frankly gave up the ghost. So they don't think this deal will pass. And my question to you is it actually going to end up on the floor of the House of Commons?
It will. The government has promised to bring the withdrawal agreement back now that the additional documents have all been ratified by the EU 27. With the new date of the 22nd of May, if the deal is passed. I think you're jumping to conclusion, Matt, with respect to you. I think it's well worth us waiting to see what happens in Parliament. Colleagues are looking at the detail now, and I think many colleagues who want to keep their promise to deliver Brexit will want to think about this long and hard, because all the other options, I think, will mean a much longer extension, which means we have to go back to our constituents and our constituencies and explain why we haven't left the EU and we have to run in European elections.
But the first thing the Cabinet heard about the contents of the letter that she wrote to Donald Tusk was actually on Twitter. Even the Cabinet was kept in the dark. So how can you give us assurances that the meaningful vote will be meaningfully put before Parliament a third time next week? Who's going to believe you?
Well, first of all, you're sort of offering these statements, which are all whispers and speculation. You haven't named a single. You haven't named a single cabinet minister who told you all this stuff. What I'm actually saying to you is the government has made it very clear that we will bring back the meaningful vote with the additional documents and, of course, the new date that if it's passed, we'll leave on the 22nd of May. If Parliament passes that, then we can move forward and deliver on the promise we made the British people to deliver on Brexit with a deal. If it doesn't, then I think all the other options mean a much longer delay, which means, I think, hugely problematic for all MPs, because we'd have to go back to our constituencies and explain why we haven't left the European Union.
Indeed. Does the Prime Minister support the indicative votes that are supposed to take place next week? And is she going to allow these votes without the whip?
Well, what the government has said is that we will bring back the meaningful vote And if the meaningful vote obviously goes through, then we move on to delivering on Brexit. If it doesn't go through, then we will have indicative votes. And by definition, an indicative vote means Parliament has to decide where it wants to be. What deal? Would it be no deal, leaving with no deal at all? Would it be another referendum? Would it be an alternative, the Labour deal? We'll have to look at all these options. I think all those options are in my view, are much worse than the Prime Minister's withdrawal agreement.
I want to ask you one more about her speech on Wednesday night, which has received widespread criticism across the board, and she almost sort of apologised for it last night. Do you think it was appropriate, the language that she used? Was it appropriate to attack members of Parliament, especially given that some of them have been threatened? And one of them, 3 years ago, was actually killed.
Look, I mean, I think what the Prime Minister was trying to do is share with the nation her frustration that Parliament cannot decide. We've had a go before at trying to vote for a referendum. That didn't go through. The Labour deal didn't go through. The Norway option didn't go through. What she was trying to explain to the nation is actually her withdrawal agreement will deliver Brexit as we promised the British people.
She was trying to pit the people against Parliament. She was trying to divide the people from Parliament.
Well, I don't believe that. I don't believe that. And today, as she has said again, she wants parliamentarians to come together and back the withdrawal agreement so we can leave in an orderly way on the 22nd of May and, of course, deliver on that promise we made the British people.
Nadeem Zahawi, thank you very much. Cathy.
Thanks, Matt. Well, now I can speak to the MP Anna Soubry of the Independent Group here in the studio. In her much maligned speech, didn't Theresa May at least have a point that people are fed up of MPs mucking around? And in that sense, at least, isn't it time you backed her deal?
Look, people are fed up, but it's not MPs who've been mucking about. I'm afraid it's the Prime Minister and her government who's been mucking about.
She's been mucking about as well as you.
No, we have not been mucking about. The one thing that will be recorded in history about this entire sorry process is the number of times that people like me have stood up at the beginning of the process and said, let us help determine the sort of Brexit that will do the right thing by British business and avoid the hard border in Northern Ireland.
The indicative votes.
Time and time again, we were told we are not interested. It's like the 48% were pushed to one side. And a consensus existed. I've had that conversation with the Prime Minister about 2 years ago, and I told her there is a consensus in Parliament for a single market, a customs union. You should do that. It will deliver Brexit, but do the right thing by British business. And she absolutely refused. Instead,
well, you've got a chance now, haven't you,
she put down her red lines.
But you've got a chance now to take back control, to coin a phrase.
This is another myth.
Well,
this is a big myth.
Because you could actually put that on the table next week, a softer Brexit, and get the consensus if it does exist.
This is a huge myth, and I'm really worried about this. I went to see David Lidington with Chuka Ramuna yesterday, and Tobias Ellwood has said this, so I can now say it, what I was told privately yesterday, because Tobias Ellwood, Defence Minister, has said it on the media today. What they are saying is the indicative votes are about this thing called the political declaration. That is this thing that will be our eventual trading relationship with the EU after we have left. That the withdrawal agreement is non-negotiable and we can't have votes about the withdrawal agreement. So the lunacy of the situation is we have indicative votes that may say single market customs union, Norway plus, but that is to be negotiated in the future. But we have to leave on the terms of her withdrawal agreement, which has to go through Parliament in statute. It's a complete disaster, and the only way through it is to put it now back to the people, which is why hundreds of thousands of people are coming to London tomorrow.
There's not a consensus for that in the Commons either,
not yet.
For the second referendum.
And you know, if Labour start to put into place its conference policy. I'm really pleased that Tom Watson, the Deputy Leader of the Labour Party, apparently is coming on the march. Now I want him to come in the lobbies with people like me and let's vote for this to go back to the British people. And I want those Tory MPs who say in private that they know it's the only way through this mess and chaos. I want them to have the courage of so many of their fellow Conservatives who've resigned from government in order to speak up for a people's vote, to have the courage to be honest about it, to act with integrity and put the country not their party first.
But we know a straight vote on a second referendum wouldn't get a majority. But are you prepared
Not
to
yet.
OK, but are you prepared to make a concession? Because we've been talking about MPs mucking about. Are you prepared to concede that you would put some form of Theresa May's deal back to the people? So you get what you want, but she gets a bit of what she wants too.
Sorry, I went to see the Chancellor with a group of members of Parliament from other political parties, and we sat there with the Chancellor of the Exchequer, I think it must be 6-8 weeks ago, and we said we will vote for Theresa's deal on the basis it goes back to the British people. We said that 6 weeks ago.
And you'd still do that now?
Of course, because it's the withdrawal agreement is something that at least could be delivered. I won't vote for it. The British people can then have a choice. If they vote for her deal, that's the end of it. And if they vote for us to remain in the European Union, which is the best deal we have with the EU, that's the end of it as well.
A lot of MPs have said that what Theresa May said, sort of pitting the public against MPs, was actually very dangerous. What's your view on that?
Well, it wasn't just dangerous, which of course it was. It was outrageous, actually. It was sort of right to the bottom of the pond of political life. It was a sort of a rather crude Donald Trumpism way of conducting oneself. It was appalling. It was also dishonest. I mean, to say that MPs have been banging on about Brexit, not talking about the shortage of funding in schools, changes to knife crime laws, how we integrate social care in NHS, that's what we're all demanding to do. It's this wretched government that is obsessed with Brexit and not delivering for the British people and putting the country first.
But are you feeling personally more threatened?
Well, that's why I'm here. I'm not
because I thought you wanted to be here.
I'm here, of course. I wouldn't be here on a Friday because I'd be at home on a Friday. I'd be in the Berliner in Beeston on a Friday night, not in London. I can't go home this weekend. My partner is away. And I had a really nasty death threat that was sent to our house by somebody who said, "We know where you live. We are on your doorstep. Look at the postcode." And I can't go home this weekend. That is the advice of the police. This senior police officer said to my other half yesterday, on Wednesday rather, he said, if she were my wife, I would be really seriously worried for her safety.
You're pretty resilient, but I mean, what toll does that take?
You know what? I mean, I am, but I haven't got a fear gene. But actually, when you receive, or your partner receives a card that says, in loving memory, in sympathy for the death of your partner, that treacherous bitch is now dead, and we're coming after you, and it's sent to your home address.
It has
seriously.
an impact.
I mean, it is absolutely awful. And what we've now got to do is bring our country back together again. And nobody is doing that, not least this government. And we've got to put all this nonsense to one side, put the country first, get on that march tomorrow and show them that we've had enough. The only way through it is that people's vote.
Anna Soubry, and just to say, obviously, apologise for the language that you repeated that you were sent, if anyone was offended by that. Matt.
In the last few minutes, it's being reported that the Prime Minister, Theresa May, has written to MPs saying that she may not bring the Brexit deal back to Parliament if there's no apparent support for it in the Commons. Well, earlier today, in Brussels, I spoke to the Belgian MEP, Philippe Lambert, who's on the Brexit steering group in the European Parliament. And I asked him if European leaders have now given up on Theresa May getting that deal through.
Obviously. I mean, she has demonstrated her utter inability to steer a credible course for the United Kingdom. And also on a personal level, the impression I have is that this lady is unable to build a rapport, to build trust with anyone else. Because when you look at how, well, the atmosphere within her own cabinet, the relationship that she has with Westminster, and especially her speech 2 days ago, and her inability to build trust with the fellow EU leaders. I mean, you know, as a politician, you need to be able to build strong relationships because that is what allows you to achieve stuff. And she seems devoid of that.
And is there anything that you could have done to have helped her more?
Well, what could we do? I mean, the difficult thing about this, and you know that, has been the existence of the Good Friday Agreement. Just imagine for a second that Britain would be Denmark, and Denmark would have voted to get out. There's no peace deal in Jutland. You don't need to keep the Schleswig-Holstein Danish border open, so you can have a clean cut with the European Union. Not so for Northern Ireland, and therefore not so for the United Kingdom. There's no way we could help about that because, well, what we could have done is encourage Ireland to leave together with the UK, but that would have been crazy. Or the other thing would have been to say, okay, we sacrifice the single market to please the hardliners within the Tory party. But that would, I mean, you cannot seriously consider such options.
But given the way that the landscape has changed in recent days, I'm going to ask you the question I ask you every time. Do you still think that a no deal Brexit is the most likely scenario?
At the moment, I still believe it is the most likely scenario, and I will change my mind when I will see the first signs of responsibility in Westminster, in the House of Commons. So far, I hope for it, but I didn't see it yet.
But you think it's up to the House of Commons? You're looking to the House of Commons, not to the government today?
No, clearly. This government is totally inept at handling the issue, and certainly the Prime Minister. There are good guys in the government, but frankly, the Prime Minister is totally inept at handling this. So if the adults in the Westminster room are not standing up to this, it's going to be no deal Brexit.
So what about a second referendum, a people's vote? Would you suggest that that's a good idea?
To be honest, I think that's the most elegant way of closing this dossier. Because it was started, of course, within the Tory party, but then the people said 52-48, we'd rather leave. Prime Minister May at least negotiated Brexit, and she came up with the only deal that is possible. It's not her deal, it's our deal as well. We support it. Now, if politicians who have invested too much capital in making bombastic statements cannot withdraw these statements or backtrack on them without losing face, the only people who can do that are the voters. So I would ask the voters, you want Brexit, that's the deal, you take it. You don't take it, we stay.
Philip Lamberts, thanks very much.
My pleasure.
This time last night, after an almighty wrangle, the EU's leaders had just given Theresa May some wriggle room and an extension to Brexit. She was due to stay for the rest of the summit, but instead scrambled back to London with the new dates burning in her pocket. Today, it's become clear that although Brexit's delayed, the crisis has only deepened, with recriminations from MPs on all sides, many of them laid right at the Prime Minister's door. Theresa May now faces the prospect of her deal failing again. In fact, she may not even put it to a vote at all. Whatever happens, it appears there's an almighty struggle ahead with Parliament to find a plan B.
The clock may have been reset. There might now be more time before Brexit. But tonight, the Prime Minister admitted in a letter to MPs that there might not be another chance to vote for her deal if it appears there is not sufficient support. Returning from Brussels, she still needs to win the support of the DUP. And today they said she had missed the chance to improve her deal at the summit.
EU leaders were in negotiating mode. She could have asked for changes there, and unfortunately has always settled far too early and compromised on issues which she didn't need to. And the changes, therefore, that she needed, she hasn't got.
In fact, the EU had taken back control of the process and told the Prime Minister how it would work.
If Parliament does not agree a deal next week, the EU Council will extend Article 50 until the 12th of April. At this point, we would either leave with no deal or put forward an alternative plan.
So the 29th of March is no longer the planned Brexit day. If MPs vote for her deal in the middle of next week, Brexit will happen on the 22nd of May. But if they don't, it will only be delayed until the 12th of April, at which point there would be a choice the government doesn't want between no deal and a longer extension.
You're asking me to choose between horrifying options. I mean, a long extension, from my point of view, is kicking the can down the road. It doesn't resolve anything.
But is a long extension less horrifying than no deal?
Yeah, it's probably less horrifying than no deal.
But in that case, we wouldn't be leaving in the spring, at least not this spring. And a separate process could decide how we do leave. On Monday, MPs may trigger a system to work out which other options have the most support. That could include a customs union, single market membership, a second referendum, or no Brexit at all. And the government is apparently not even taking a position.
Obviously, if the House is being asked to decide a way forward, it would be surprising if those votes were not free votes.
Power is seeping away from the government.
I mean, this is the future of our whole country, and he intimated the government wouldn't take a position, in which case it's no longer a government.
And everyone thinks their idea can win MPs' backing.
There is support for various alternative options, one of which we'll put, which is of a customs union with Europe and is about market access and protection of rights.
But ahead of a second referendum rally in London tomorrow, Labour's deputy leader Tom Watson took a different approach, saying he would vote for the government's deal if it was then put to a vote.
I'm going on the Put It to the People march to say to Theresa May that I'll help her get her Brexit deal over the line if she gives you the right to consent to it.
It's not an offer the Prime Minister is likely to accept. And today her team have been weighing up the chances of her deal getting through Parliament at the third time of asking, and whether it's even worth trying.
Carl, can we predict anything for next week yet?
Well, look, we can look at what people are saying they will do. So the government has said that if it doesn't get the support to bring its deal forward, or if the Speaker blocks again, or if they lose, then they will move to this system of so-called indicative votes, where they allow Parliament to start choosing what option they prefer. Now, MPs don't entirely trust the government to do that, so they are also putting in place their own series of indicative votes to choose what option they prefer, at the end of which we could end up with the Parliament telling the government to go away and do something that it doesn't want to do. So we can't really tell how that will end up. But at the same time, Parliament has to hold votes to move that Brexit date as all this goes on next week. And I wouldn't be surprised that somewhere in the mix, the hardline Brexiters who still want to leave at the end of next week will try and mount some kind of an ambush. So the only thing I can say with much certainty about next week is that it could get very, very messy indeed. And we still face, I think, the likelihood of leaving the EU without a deal, albeit maybe not in 1 week, but in 3 weeks, because nobody has agreed a different option.
And a PM under pressure like never before, it has to be said. Thank you very much indeed for that, Carl.